You, watching this, answer me straight. If your life depended on it, could you drag a string that bites like a wolf, again and again until your fingers turn to stone? Don't nod yet. By the end of this story, you'll know whether you're built for the longbow or whether the longbow would break you. They told Will, let's call him Will, because he could be any village boy. That church on Sunday was followed by a second religion, archery. Not a hobby, a law. Priests gave blessings, then constables counted bodies on the green. Boys from 7 up to grandfathers pushing 60 were marched out with staves and short bows, and if you skipped, fines, stocks, public humiliation. The king didn't ask, he commanded, because England's muscle wasn't just in castles, it was in the calluses of its archers. Will's first bow wasn't elegant. Hazel stick, frayed hemp. He drew, it shuddered. He cried, and the men around him didn't blink. Tears weren't a reason to stop. They were proof you'd started. Again. He pulled until blisters split, blood slicked the string, and the lesson set like mortar. If the bow doesn't change, you have to. By 12, the toy was gone. You replaced hazel, a real stave, pale heartwood backed by dark sapwood, a living spring that kicked like a mule. Draw weights weren't numbers to boast about, they were a daily sentence, 100 pounds of raw argument between bone and wood. Watch his body mutate in time-lapse. Left shoulder swells, back knots like old rope, fingers toughen into horn. You can dig a needle into his pad and it'll shrug off the steel. Skeletons pulled from medieval graves still tell on themselves, drawing arms thicker, collarbones reshaped, spines twisted by 1,000 identical motions. Will isn't lifting at the gym. He is the gym. Stone lifting, river hauling, endless draws at a straw butt until the straw is butchered. Other kids play at chase. Will chases the perfect release and sleeps with a dull throb from neck to wrist, the sort of ache you stop noticing because it never stops. Don't romanticize the bow, because it's pretty. It's a beautiful tyrant. 6 feet of yew that only weighs a few pounds but feels like an anvil after 20 miles. The string is hemp or flax, hungry for wax and allergic to rain. Get it damp and it goes slack. Keep drawing and it snaps right into your face. That's why Will wraps spare strings with beeswax, keeps them under hat or hood, protected like rosary beads. A smart archer treats water like an enemy right up until he needs to drink it. Arrows? Not movie quivers on your back like a peacock. Hip sheaves, boot-stuffed shafts, bundles jammed into the earth at your feet so you can pluck and go. 60 to 100 in a real fight, more if supply wagons keep up. Shafts matched to the bow's temper too light, they flutter. Too heavy, they sag. Goose feathers fletched with care. Heads hammered by a smith who knows whether today's business is punching mail, biting into plates' gaps, or tearing through unarmored flesh. Will learns to feel an arrow's mood in the dark. He can knock blind, draw by habit, and let the strings sing before his brain finishes the sentence. Let me ruin your fantasy quickly. Being an archer isn't 50 seconds of glorious slow-motion kills. It's carrying a hatefully awkward 6-foot stick and a bag of metal for days on roads that barely qualify as roads. You start before dawn, no coffee, no fire, because smoke is a flag that says, "Rob me." Breakfast is cold bread. You soften in spit and stubbornness. Boots? Thin leather that laughs at puddles and loses to stones. If you're lucky, you've got a gambeson, quilted layers, hot in summer, wet sponge in rain, and maybe, just maybe, a scrap of mail and a kettle hat. The noble houses sleep in tents. Will sleeps in his cloak, cheek to mud, sharing the hospitality of lice. March 20 miles, sometimes more. If the baggage lags, you're eating air and swallowing curses. Rain turns yards into arenas of humiliation. Strings go slack. Bow staves hate damp and warp if you store them wrong. Men joke to stay sane. Half mule, half man. That's not a joke. It's a diagnosis. Now raise your head, because something important happens on these roads. The grind makes monsters. Blisters bloom and die. Backs stiffen into iron, feet harden until sharp stones feel like rumors. Will learns how to pace his breath under 80 pounds of problem, how to count steps without thinking, how to move like a pack animal, and still have enough violence left in his arms to drag a string and fire 12 arrows a minute when someone finally has the courtesy to try to kill him. The battlefield is not chaos, it's math with sharp edges. You don't just stand and shoot, you pick ground like you pick friends, because it saves your life. A slight rise buys you distance. A patch of woods pins your flank. A wet field steals cavalry's courage. Wind is a bully, you learn to bully back. Sun angles make enemies squint. The lie of the land, the lie of the weather. These are your allies if you're clever. Will and the others set stakes thick ash poles with iron tips angled toward the enemy horse. You do not want a destrier hitting you at full gallop. Stakes say no. The line bows into a curve, not for beauty, but so that when arrows fall, they cross their paths, multiplying panic. Commanders don't shout. Noise eats words. So you watch flags. You feel drums. You listen for horn calls that mean ready, loose, again. And when loose comes, the world changes temperature. 100 men firing 1,000 shafts a minute turns the air to sleet. At places like Crécy or Poitiers, or the mud-choked miracle of Agincourt, walls of knights come on in, glittering arrogance, and smash face first into a storm so thick they can't breathe without swallowing feathers. Plate stops a lot, yes, but not everything. Joints have gaps. Visors have slits. Horses panic. A few men fall, they trip the ones behind, and a river of bodies starts to flood the choke point. And Will? Will is a machine that breathes and draws. Knock, draw, anchor, loose. Knock, draw, anchor, loose. A rhythm that drowns fear. Don't romanticize this either. Arrows don't politely stick and pose. They break ribs, punch into armpits, bury in groins, tear throats, crack teeth through visor slits. Men pray out loud and then choke on their prayers. The smell is metal and mud and bowel. If you flinch, you stop being Will and start being a name scratched on a church door. So, Will counts, because counting is clean. 10 per minute, maybe more. 60 shafts in 5 minutes if he goes for broke. After that, what then? Then the bow becomes a staff, and the staff becomes a bad idea. The enemy who makes it to you has survived the storm and is furious. Arrows are gone. You go to steal. The rondel dagger at your belt is tool and weapon both. Cut meat with it at noon, dig through a visor gap at dusk. Some men swing Maul's big-headed hammers that dent plate and arms with equal indifference. Others carry little hand axes, the kind that split kindling and, in a pinch, skulls. Will's gambeson drinks strikes until it's had enough. Against a knight in harness, he's a rabbit swiping at a wolf's nose. Still, wolves bleed. He aims for where plates kiss and leave a seam. The armpit, the back of the knee, the groin when luck surrenders. He grapples, and now the strength he forged in 100,000 draws cashes out. Wrestling in mud is equal opportunity murder. If you're squeamish, skip 10 seconds, but don't lie to yourself. Victory here is ugly. You stand on men because there's no ground left. You breathe through cloth because the stink assaults your will to live. And when the horn finally calls you off, your hands shake not from fear, but because the adrenaline bill came due. Now let's talk medicine, if you can call it that. Arrow through the bicep? If it's clean and the head punched out the other side, a surgeon might pour wine through the tunnel and call it fortunate. If the head barbed and buried, they get out a crow's beak, a vicious little instrument, and go fishing. Half the time they succeed. The other half, the infection wins. Swords carve neat lines that sometimes stitch. Maces make pulp. Cautery irons close vessels and open screaming. Needles are horsehair and boar bristles. Anesthetics are wine, ale, opium, if the stars align. Field hospitals are straw, shared flies, and a chorus of men lying to each other about how fine they feel. Will's friend Tom loses 2 fingers on his draw hand to a badly placed blade. He will never bend a war bow again, and the army counts him as a cost of doing business. If he's lucky, the captain finds him a job with the wagons. If he's unlucky, he goes home with a hand that can't feed him. Some men, hearing the tramp of new musters, take a knife to their own fingers before the crown can take their body. That's not cowardice, that's a calculation. You still with me? Good. Because your next question should be, why do this? What do they get? 6 pence a day on campaign, more than a laborer, less than a dream. Paid when the treasurer feels generous and the roads don't swallow the payroll. IOUs from lords who swear on the saints and then forget. So you look downward when gentility lectures you on honor, and you look upward when you think about loot. Officially, looting is wicked. Unofficially, it's the retirement plan. A captured knight's harness can be worth months of wages. A good horse is a miracle on 4 legs. Even better boots, a serviceable dagger, a coin purse you didn't bring, you pretend you found them, and nobody argues. Between wars, nobody's paying you to keep your draw fingers thick, yet you must. Bows don't forgive layoffs. So Will works harvests, mends, fences, fletches for pennies, trades archery tricks for ale. He keeps pulling at empty air to keep strength alive, because if war comes and he can't draw, he's a liability. Injury compensation? If the parish is kind or your captain grateful, you get a few shillings. Mostly, you get a shrug. And at church, on certain Sundays, you get a sermon that frowns on missiles used against fellow Christians. It's complicated. Kings adore you in autumn and ignore you in spring. Priests bless you when you march and blame you when you plunder. Nobles sneer until your arrows save their titles. Common folk admire and fear you in equal measure. Mothers hide sons when recruiters arrive. Fathers measure boys with quiet pride and quieter dread. Women eye archers the way sailors get eyed. Exciting while you're home, likely to vanish before winter ends. Now, because you've earned one, let's give you a day in glory, muddy, bloody glory. Picture northern France, October 1415. The English army limps toward Calais, sick, thin, boots eating their feet. The French mass in numbers that feel unfair. The ground is churned farmland, sticky like treacle. The English lines anchor on woods. The archers drive stakes. Will is there because will is the name we give to endurance. A horn, a prayer that is more habit than hope. And then the arrow storm. Not a few, a cloud that moves like weather. French bravado collides with physics and mud. Plate that shrugs off single hits, drowns in the crush. Horses skitter, fall, roll their riders into pits, their own hooves cut. Will's shoulder burns. He rides the burn like a sailor rides swell. He knows the winds whisper by ear. He feels the drop in range like a sixth sense. The French reach the line in sticky, furious handfuls and discover that archers who lived through childhood are bad at dying quietly. Daggers find visor slits. Mauls turn helmets concave. The English line doesn't break. It grinds. When it's finally done, the field looks like a blacksmith's scrap bin poured onto a slaughterhouse floor. Will sags. He has no poetry for this. He rummages for arrows worth salvaging and wipes them on grass that can't get any dirtier. He counts friends. He comes up short. He stares until the mud forgets his boots and tries to keep them. Then he lifts. There's always something to carry. You want a secret nobody writes on banners? The longbow's greatest weapon is boredom beaten into obedience. The glamour is 5 minutes. The price is years. Will's hands are not miraculous. They are stubborn. His back is not superhuman. It is disciplined. He learned to love routine because routine is a staircase to the few minutes when history pays attention. Night after the fight, he's not triumphant. He's busy. Strings check. Stave dried by the least smoky corner of a cautious flame. feathers straightened, arrowheads reseeded with heated resin. He eats what passes for stew and what passes for bread. He drinks as much as he dares, less than he wants. He looks at the men who didn't come back and does the arithmetic of survival, luck, skill, ground, weather, and the stupid miracle of still being here. Let's pull the camera in close, because the truth sits in the details you can touch. The pad on his drawing fingers has a ridge, a groove worn by a string that never once pitied him. The inside of his right elbow is mottled from 1,000 brushes with a string he loosed a breath too early. His left traps and deltoid have knotted into a ridge that doesn't exist on other men. He walks a little sideways, not from injury, but from years of carrying 6 feet of "don't drop me" at a diagonal. When he lies down, one shoulder hits the ground before the other, bone talking to dirt. He isn't a hero in his head. Heroes don't worry about damp bow bags or the angle of a stake line. He doesn't think about destiny. He thinks about wind from the left at 14 paces per second and how a goose quill behaves in wet air. He keeps an extra string under his cap. He keeps an extra plan under his pride. He looks at hills and sees range. He looks at forests and sees ambush. He looks at clouds and sees timing. He looks at you across 6 centuries and sees a challenger who thinks gym strength is the same as bow strength. It's not. The longbow isn't a deadlift. It's a one-hand, 3-finger promise you have to keep hundreds of times without excuse. Before you answer the question I asked at the start, let me level with you about the cost that arrives after the marching and the swagger are done. Archers age early. Arthritis sends letters before 30 and moves in by 40. Fingers wake numb. Shoulders grind like millstones. The hand that fed you for 20 years refuses coins some mornings. There's no pension unless loot became land, and land doesn't grow on defeat. Many end the story not with a toast, but with a quiet burial, a mark on a parish roll, a bow unstrung and forgotten in a corner. And yet, don't look away. There's pride here that no ledger understands. Pride in a craft that asks everything and pays in rare victories and daily competence. Pride in making a bow sing the same note every time, no matter the rain. Pride in knowing maps by taste, weather by smell, danger by sound. Pride that isn't loud, because loud wastes breath. So, since you've stayed with me this far, let's try that question again, this time with your eyes wide open. Could you be Will? Could you train until your bones confess? Could you carry until your spine complains in a language you learn to ignore? Could you stand on sticky ground with your stomach arguing and draw anyway 10, 12 times a minute because men you'll never meet will live if you do and die if you don't? Could you trade romance for routine and keep going when the music stops and the knives come out? If your gut says yes, you've got more grit than most knights who ever wore armor. The longbow doesn't care about your rank. It only respects your repetitions. Here's what you should take away before the credits roll. The English longbow wasn't magic. It was a machine made of you and men who refused to quit. Laws forced boys to start. Habit kept them deadly. Misery kept them mean. And on a few muddy fields, the world bent around their willpower. Between those fields lay hunger, bad boots, cold beds, and the knowledge that no choir would sing your name. Between those fields lay the life you actually live. Grease on strings, wax under nails, sweat under gambeson, jokes traded in whispers, fear swallowed in gulps, and a bow that gave back pain more faithfully than it gave back glory. If you still think you're built for it, I believe you. Not because you're strong, strength is the easy part, but because you listened to the ugly bits and didn't flinch. That's the first requirement of every archer who ever mattered. The second? Show up tomorrow and do it again.